All right, we're joined here today by the one, the only Scott Fontana, episode 34 of the Lucas Grandsire podcast. Like I always say, super creative name, super creative guy, all that stuff. What's going on, sir? How are you?
I'm doing well, Lucas. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I appreciate you for coming on. Like I was telling you off camera, it's been a while since we've done these, but felt like you're a good guest to get things going back. And with all the crazy things happening in the combat sports world, we've got a bunch of stuff to get to.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was nice to have a little break from like the UFC's schedule that just kind of it never stops. But then finally took a break this week, and I'm like, thank God, I kind of needed it.
And that's the thing too. A lot of people were like, we don't like events every week because they get watered down. We skip one, but I feel like they're still watered down though. Everybody was like, we come back to Smith versus Ryan Spann. It was like, it didn't really benefit as much as we thought it would.
I think I just think that they're in such a weird situation now with the pandemic and everything that there's been I mean, Dana even alluded to it. He kind of doesn't mind a bloated roster right now, right? There's a lot of people who are on the roster that, maybe they have fewer fights than you would typically be used to seeing on the UFC roster. A lot of people coming from the Contender Series and stuff like that. A lot of people sign last minute. So I understand kind of how this can happen. And I think, too, there's it's a lot easier for people to fight on these cards, especially at the Apex, if they're in the country, and internationally, it makes it just a little bit tougher in the pandemic, right? I think we're out of it, but it's still not quite.
You touched on the Contender Series, and I've been seeing a lot of when it started, everybody was like, "Oh, it's great for these prospects. The fights are hype," and we're here a few seasons later, and I feel like people are kind of pushing back on the Contender Series. I saw an article come out this week that was saying like, the Ultimate Fighter is more important than the Contender Series. I've seen like it appears a bunch of stuff has sort of shifted with the Contender Series. How do you feel about it now compared to when it first started?
See, I've never been a regular viewer of the Contender Series. I'll check it out here and there, but it's just not something I typically. I almost need a break from that, especially because of so many UFC events, right? But I like the idea of the Contender Series as it is, much better than the Ultimate Fighter. I'm so not into the Ultimate Fighter. I was like rooting against it coming back.
Yeah.
You know, the Contender Series, at least, you don't have to go on a show. You don't have to do all these things. And how much are we really making stars out of the people on the Ultimate Fighter anymore? Like it's not Forrest Griffin. It's not, Chris Lieben. It's a different thing now. It's really just a vehicle to get a couple prospects in there and, pump the UFC's brand, right?
Well, it's weird too about the Ultimate Fighter because I feel like everybody's like, we don't care about the drama, we only care about the fights. But when you do that, like the drama's kind of what created the stars, right? Chris Lieben, crying about "Don't talk about my dad," like all these iconic moments. It didn't happen in the cage. I feel like we talk more about that drama, and it feels like they've sort of stepped away from it. Even the coaches like Volkanovski and Ortega, like, are those really the two guys? Like, I appreciated the sort of trash talk a little bit on the clips I did see because I didn't watch the show, but it felt like if you were going to try to sell us the Ultimate Fighter, like you'd have to get those coaches that you feel like if they see each other, like it's on site.
One would think, yeah, at the very least, you'd kind of want coaches that are like that. But again, I think there was more of an opportunity kind of thing here just because of the timing of, Volkanovski was supposed to fight Ortega, and then Volkanovski gets COVID. I actually spoke to him for an interview the day before everyone found out he got COVID, or probably before he found out he got COVID, and everything was fine. And then obviously he got kind of stuck here. So it's like, well, I mean, if he's here, I mean, I guess he might as well do that, right? So I think it was more of a right place, right time for those guys rather than them trying to seek out the absolute best, matchup that could kind of bring in a lot of drama and that kind of thing. But I think if you're looking at like matchups like that, you would bring a lot of heat, right? The one that comes to mind, and this was before, we wouldn't have done this, but a good one would have been Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa, right? That would have been a fun one. I think that's what you're looking for, right?
Exactly, because when we talk about best seasons, for me, I feel like Rampage Jackson and Rashad Evans, like maybe the fights are a little wonky because it was heavyweights, but man, those two brought it. Like they gave us iconic lines like the famous titties, if you feel froggy jump. Like they did so many different things throughout that season. And it's like even if the fights were kind of crappy and Kimbo Slice was there and
Kimbo's there.
Brendan Schaub was, still focused on being a fighter and stuff like that. So it was entertaining, but then it kind of finished up and now I feel like they've sort of stepped away from what could have made the show more exciting. Like it's just a cheap thing. Like you mentioned, two guys that have some heat or one of the guys knows how to talk and then you can sort of elevate it a little bit.
It really, again, I'm not a big fan of the Ultimate Fighter,
Right.
but if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna have this show, what it really ought to be is a star vehicle for your fighters. But that's
Yeah.
not really what the UFC is interested in. They're interested in pumping the UFC brand. So you don't want to make. If I'm the UFC right now, the way they seem to structure things, I don't want another Conor McGregor because Conor has a lot of power. And
Yeah.
I think that's really what they don't want. They want guys that are going to draw, but they're also not going to draw more than the UFC's brand. So it's kind of a difficult thing. I don't think you're going to get a lot of like that anyway. I think it's probably not going to happen even on the Ultimate Fighter, but it should be for making someone like Brian Ortega more visible. So if you think he's going to be your champion or something like that, you want him to cross into maybe just a little bit different of an audience, because I don't know how many dedicated MMA fans are still really into the Ultimate. I mean, there probably are. I'm sure there are, but I feel like that's also trying to reach a different type of fan that maybe isn't watching every week, and they're trying to pull them back or trying to get them into it. So yeah, I don't know. You definitely want the better personalities, I would think.
Well, the issue also is how do you watch the thing? Like, they're like, you have to go on ESPN and we release it at a certain time. And some people were like, we're watching it live. I'm like, what are you watching it live on? Like, they've made it so difficult. Like, it just, at one point, like, you scroll through your TV, you're on, it's like, oh, maybe some face punch and you watch for a little bit. But now, like, if you have to jump through hoops to watch something you don't necessarily want to watch that much, what's the point?
Yeah, you can't channel surf to find it, that's for sure. And I think a lot of people probably found the Ultimate Fighter originally, on Spike way back, probably from channel surfing or from talking to other people and stuff like that. It's a different world, and I think they're kind of stuck with what they have, right? They're on the UFC's platforms on the ESPN platforms, and they're kind of going to get what they're going to get. There's not really much more they can do, right?
The only good thing for the Ultimate Fighter for me is I know a few years ago, I guess I thought I was a part of the media, even though I hadn't actually done anything media related. I was just on Twitter, and somebody had watched one of the Ultimate Fighters early, and I was like, "Oh, how'd you watch it?" And he was like, "They send the media an email," and I was like, "Oh, I guess they don't think I'm media." I was disappointed. And then now, flash forward, now I get an email like a couple days before. It's like, "Here's the full episode. Here's the exclusive. Don't share it." And yeah, appreciate that. But in reality, inside, it's like, ESPN has given me the satisfaction of making me feel like I belong with these people.
There
So
you
that,
go.
but I still didn't watch it. I mean, I have
Not
it
me
in
either.
my.
I
have it
also
in,
got those same emails, and I'm
yeah.
like, so it's
No. Yeah.
I'm covering. When I like to write, I like to write about the people in the sport, the
Yeah.
interesting stories, the things that are going on. I'm not even as interested so much on like I had the best camp of my life, and like shout out to
Yeah,
Fernanda Prades. Yeah, I
exactly.
love her show. But it's that kind of thing. I'm more interested in that than I am about promoting another television show that I'm especially just not personally very interested in.
So you do work for the New York Post, obviously, which is a very, like, people hear that and it's like, wow, that's a big deal. What does kind of a typical day look like for you? Are you on staff? Are you sort of freelancing a little bit? What does it kind of look like for you working for them?
So I was actually hired as for the copy department with sports. So what my job that I was hired for, and I'm actually just coming up on my 1 year anniversary this week. I was hired to design pages for the newspaper, to kind of work on editing copy for some of the stories that will go in the newspaper, writing headlines. Occasionally, I've contributed the back page headline for sports, the Wood, which is really cool, especially if I grew up in this area. I'm from Jersey, so the New York Post even more so than I think a lot of people do around the country. It's like it's there all the time. So to get one of those back page Wood, it was really, really cool for me a couple times to get that. So that's really a typical day for me. What I did to get into the MMA beat was when once I was hired, I said, okay, they're not doing any UFC stuff. Maybe that's something I can do. Once I got my feet under me after a couple months, I reached out to our editing staff especially on the website. And I said, hey, are you interested in any UFC coverage? They said, yeah, definitely. Whatever you're looking to do. So I pretty much have just kind of taken the reins into my hands on my own and said, okay, I want to start covering the sport for us. And so that has been kind of what I've been doing ever since the beginning of the year, January, with those first fights over at Fight Island, Max Holloway, Calvin Kattar. Those were a couple of the guys I spoke to first when I first started the beat for the New York Post. So it's been a lot of fun. But, typically the UFC and MMA coverage, it's not my primary duties, except for, when Connor fought. That was something I got a little bit more time for. When they come to New York in a couple months, that's something I'm probably going to have a lot of time for, covering for us as well. So that's really what a typical day kind of looks like for me. Hopefully that answered it anyway.
It's interesting because we're seeing more and more outlets sort of take an interest in. Obviously, the way it starts off is, we want UFC stuff, and then you kind of explain like, well, there's a little bit more if you're willing to sort of look into it. But I know for me, Clutch Points reached out and they were like, we want to start getting into MMA, and they do pretty much every sport you can think of. So it's like you're noticing that these outlets are paying attention. I guess the numbers are interesting for them because that's what it is. At the end of the day, it's the numbers. So it's interesting to see that and watch how the sport's growing with more and more people taking interest. And obviously the circus fights last night, it's like those are easy clicks, so people feel like they have to do something about it.
Yeah, fortunately, my editors have not been, they don't tell me like, you got to do this because it's going to get us numbers, or it's something that if I know it's going to get numbers and I'm interested in covering it on our behalf, I will write it up. Sometimes we'll just have someone on staff will see what's going on in the world, and they'll write what happened off it. Like, for example, on Friday night in Combate Global, they had the transgender fighter Alana McLaughlin. She won her fight, of course, and it was the end of my shift, so I said, okay, you guys should know for the morning you might want to write this up. So in the morning they wrote up a story about it, and everybody, we actually got a lot of clicks from that. That actually drew a lot of eyeballs, of course.
Well, I think there's a lot of curiosity there too, because people are already looking at MMA like it's so. For some people who aren't updated, it's like the Wild West and all that stuff, and then it's like a transgender. What's going on here? But if there was one place to stay away from, it was Twitter. After that one, like people had never watched
Yeah.
Combate, like all of a sudden everybody's an expert on this promotion, and here's what they should have done, and the pictures going around, and everybody spreading the ignorance. It was like, whew, man, like you want to tell people, like, even if for whatever reason you disagree, like maybe just shut up about it. You know what I mean? It was crazy, like how opinionated people were on this thing that they wouldn't have followed otherwise.
I mean, it for me, it's just not surprising.
Yeah.
I'm not a big social, like I know I have to do social media. So in the last year plus, I've kind of made myself be a lot more in Twitter and social media and that kind of thing, but it's really not my thing. I don't enjoy it. It's not my favorite part of the job, and I'm not shy about that either, So I am in no way surprised by the reactions that we got off of that, because everybody, I mean, Twitter really exists as someone who has their thought in their head. I feel like, for some people anyway, they just have a thought in their head. They're like, I don't want to keep this to myself. I want you to know it. So I'm going to put it out there and force my opinion on you, I guess.
And some of these places like ESPN MMA, for example, the social team over there, they do a great job, but they need to pay attention too, because sometimes they'll retweet stuff from fighters without realizing, like without thinking about it, and they'll make themselves get in trouble. I don't know if you saw it. I think Ricky Simone put something and then they retweeted him, and
He
everybody was
did. He
like,
did the Jonah Hill one. Yeah, now I know what you're
yeah.
talking about. Yeah,
Everybody was like, yeah. Everybody was like, what the hell are you doing? It's like, man, think about it, because that's a great way to like spread misinformation and hate and stuff like that without even paying attention. She's like, oh, it's a fighter reacting.
It's look. Is it terribly surprising that Ricky Simone did this? No.
No.
It's you almost kind of just roll your eyes and move on with it. But when UFC, when ESPN MMA, they retweet that, I don't think they were thinking that hard about this. I don't know if that represents the views that they do or do not want to convey. I'm gonna guess no, but yeah, it's a bad look. It just is.
The biggest tweet I saw that just kind of shut everything down, because people argue like, yeah, well, what about if you're using hormones or blah blah blah, and then somebody was like, her opponent knew about it, her opponent consented, and for me, like when I saw that, I was like, well, that just doesn't shut people up. Like I don't know what else would. Like what else do you want people to add to that sort of narrative that they're putting out there?
The only thing I would say to that is we had the fight last night with Vitor Belfort and Evander Holyfield, and that was kind of a similar situation, but on the other side, it's like, well, they consented. It's like, well, I don't know if they really ought to be, but that is different in the sense that Evander Holyfield, you have to worry about cognitive questions there, and the fact that obviously this is a man who's been fighting for a very long time, long before I was born, and I'm not a young man. And so, it's different in that. But to go back to your point, yeah, I mean, these two women are presumably of sound mind and able to distinguish whether they want to take on the challenge of facing one another or not. I have no issue with it. I just don't. I really don't. And I think when we watched this fight, we realized, well, this wasn't someone who was biologically or was born a man, was written down as a man when she was born. She didn't go beat the brakes off of the woman she beat. This was a fight she was kind of losing in the first round, came back and won. I don't know how if you didn't know the history and everything like that, and you watch that fight, you'd say, okay, this was just a regular fight. You wouldn't bat an eye. So that's really, for me, the eye test kind of bears out right here, right?
I mean, it kind of sounds like I think what people are expecting is to see like Brock Lesnar in a wig go out there and like fight some tiny woman and then just like practically kill her. And it's like, yeah, come on, you watched this sport long enough to know that's not how it works. Even though it's a funny visual, but I mean, you should know better than to think stuff like that.
We have obviously those two images that are going around with before
Yeah,
transition and after and everything like that. And I think people are obviously using that as some sort of, look at this. Should this person be allowed to fight?
yeah,
It's like, well, probably not the person
right.
before with all the muscle mass, but after, you can tell there is a significant loss of muscle mass. This is not the same person. They made the same weight. I don't know all of the biological factors, and it's just not something I'm going to get into. To borrow John Nash's terminology, is above my pay grade. But I look at this. I have nothing against anyone in the transgender community. I support the transgender community. I have a cousin who I love dearly, who transitioned many years ago. So I support trans rights and everything like that. And I watch this fight and I say, look, where's the problem? What really happened in this fight that's a problem for you?
So speaking of, you touched on the topic a little bit. We had some circus fights last night, some
Yeah.
well, circus boxing matches, whatever you want to call them. I believe you said you didn't need to cover them. Did you watch them, or are you one of the guys that caught the clips later on?
I caught clips later. I was not interested. I had other stuff to do. I mean, I'm worried about, like I told you, my daily stuff here. It's like I can make time for it if it's the UFC or if it's something else that's going on in the world that's of interest to me and to us. It just really didn't cross over. No one at work said, "Hey, would you do that for us?" And I didn't. I wasn't going to volunteer because I really wasn't in support of it. I was just morbidly curious about what would happen in Anderson Silva against Tito Ortiz, and it went just about exactly as I planned or as I expected it to. And I'm not. I don't root for a man to lose his consciousness, but if someone's going to lose it, I'm not mad that it's Tito Ortiz against Anderson Silva. We'll go with that.
I mean, Anderson Silva, who would have figured like boxing would have been the feel good story? Everybody when he was announced boxing, everyone was like, "Oh boy, here we go." And I mean, I guess y'all must have forgot, right? Like the guy can strike and he's knocking out Tito Ortiz, beating guys with a big name, like in his last fight. I mean, he's getting stuff done. I mean, now obviously we're talking about Jake Paul. It's like, can we move away from that and get into the more interesting stuff? Like I like the idea of him boxing Vitor Belfort next. Like, maybe Vitor fighting a guy who isn't 60, but that maybe that's just me. But I'm enjoying watching what Anderson Silva's doing in boxing so far.
I am enjoying Anderson Silva, and obviously he's an older fighter and someone who was on a big losing streak. He wasn't getting knocked out left and right, though. Obviously, he lost his last fight by knockout, but this wasn't somebody who was 9, 10 knockouts in a row. We didn't have some sort of even like an Alistair Overeem situation where Overeem every time Overeem trots out there, you're like, someone's losing their lights, and it's usually Overeem. But with Silva, I think he had a little bit of boxing experience, very little bit, but he had some. And I think this is somebody who trained boxing here and there on the side for decades. This isn't someone who just picked it up in the last few months like Tyron Woodley, like Ben Askren. This is someone who studies combat sports of all kinds and has a very strong appreciation for boxing. I was never worried about him coming. I honestly, I didn't make a pick or anything like that. But I kind of thought he was going to beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. back a few months ago. So him doing this, I kind of expected the knockout too. So I'm not even terribly surprised by it, but it is a really good story. And to go back to what you said about Jake Paul, I actually kind of want him to go against Jake Paul for two reasons. One, he's going to get a giant payout, a monstrous payout, something that Anderson Silva, if someone deserves a payout from mixed martial arts, it is Anderson Silva or George St. Pierre or Khabib, somebody like that. They need to get one of those payouts. So that's one. Number two, I think he beat Jake Paul. So we would finally have that win that everybody in MMA keeps rooting for. Like, come on, Tyron. Come on, Ben. Oh, you guys don't know how to box, do you? Anderson Silva knows how to box.
I mean, it also shows me that it kind of feels like the UFC didn't really know what to do with Anderson Silva at that point. Like, they were matching him up against young guys, or Uriah Hall, who I don't want to say doesn't have a future, but I don't think he's going to be necessarily a title contender. So it was like, what was the point of that matchup? And now you put him against older guys who, Tito Ortiz, not a striker, but you're putting him against guys that make a more fair matchup. And there's a second win to Anderson Silva's career. So it feels to me like the UFC sort of missed an opportunity to, they could have given us some fight night events where he's fighting a Vitor or a Lyoto, somebody older, and you could have continued making interesting fights for him in MMA.
I don't know that they really did it wrong from their perspective, though, because what you do with those older fighters, those names, is you feed them to the younger fighters to get those names on their resumes. When you had Anderson Silva go against Israel Adesanya, that was great because it gave Israel Adesanya a win over the legend Anderson Silva. They can always say that. You want to do that. Uriah Hall, maybe a little bit of a different case, like you're saying. He wasn't necessarily on the title track or anything like that. I wonder. I think because he lost so many, it's like there's only so many things you can do with him. Like, who are you going to give him to? Emin Shabazian or something like that? I don't know. I don't know that that's going to accomplish what they want, because I wonder if he'd actually beat Shabazian. I don't know. But I think they did it the way they would love to do that with these type of guys. But yes, I think there's plenty of guys on the UFC roster that Anderson Silva could beat today. Absolutely.
So Vitor versus Holyfield, kind of, even going into it, you were like, how is there anything interesting about this? It wasn't. The referee was kind of, I guess, the man of reason for once. Usually we're criticizing him. This guy was like, no, that's enough. But how on earth did this fight happen? Like, seriously, who looked at it and thought, yeah, this could be fun?
I feel like just observationally, you look at the Florida Commission there, and it really just doesn't seem like anybody cares anymore as far as like that. It's like, we're just going to get the money. And I wonder if things like that come from the top. I don't want to get political, and I don't know everything about Florida politics, but it does seem like the governor there, Ron DeSantis, is very open to a lot of things happening in Florida right now. So it's almost like an anything goes, and Florida man comes to mind. There's so many things about Florida right now that it's just, and if you live in Florida, I'm sorry. I'm sorry in general, but it's hard to look at this as anything other than the Florida Commission really just doesn't care.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, they were like, we can't do it in California. And you're like, well, of course, because California has the great Andy Foster and people that are actually paying attention. And then,
yes.
And then they were like, oh, we're moving into Florida and they're cool. And you're like, yeah, it's a very Florida thing for you to do. Like, why am I not surprised it's Florida?
It's this commission shopping stuff. You don't want to see that. I think the UFC throughout their years have typically avoided that. I think when they had the when they were looking to get potentially in the the Indian reservations, the Indian casinos. I think it was Tachi Palace back during the pandemic when no one in California licensed it and everything like that. That was an ugly look for the UFC too, but ultimately at least it didn't go there. So you can say that much for them. They never actually crossed over into doing this. Whereas Triller and all these other people said, whatever. And yeah, it's ugly. I hate it. I was someone who at least was mildly interested in the idea of Evander Holyfield against Mike Tyson in an exhibition boxing match again. But after watching all this week, like I wish they hadn't pushed forward with the fight. I wish they canceled it. And I really never want to see Evander Holyfield do anything competitive and physically like that again. Never, never, never. Just leave his head alone.
To be fair to Holyfield, though, that man is almost 60 and he is jacked. I mean, he
looks great.
He is. I mean, he's always been in fantastic shape, but you look at him and you're like, that's somebody's grandfather who's out there jacked. Like, this guy almost made, he kind of made Vitor look small. Like, I don't want to say there's some special supplements in there, but there's definitely something cooking over there. Like, there's no way at 60 can be just jacked like that.
Who knows? And if he wasn't competing for so long, like, what's the problem? First off, I don't have a problem with it. If this is what you want to do with your body at that point, you're 58 years old and you've had a lot of head trauma and all that. Do you, Evander? But just, we don't need you in the ring anymore. We don't. There's amazing things that happened in the 80s and the 90s, and we can hang on to that, and that's it.
And the funny thing about Vitor is I feel like a lot of guys in a matchup like this, they would have went slow and then maybe finished in some later rounds. Vitor didn't feel like doing any of that. It was like first opportunity, swarmed like a million punches, like in his prime, and then just put an end to it. Like I thought it was kind of weird that he didn't try to play that game a little bit. No feeling now, no nothing. He was like, let's just go assault this old man.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to take your word on that. I actually didn't, like I said, I didn't really
Oh
watch it.
yeah,
I kind of saw like the stoppage. That was just about it.
yeah.
But I'm glad that I'll say this. I'm just glad it didn't go much longer, and I'm glad he didn't have to be put on the canvas like Tito Ortiz.
So speaking of Tito Ortiz, I'm seeing this conspiracy theory because it's Tito Ortiz. Every fight of his has to have, but was that fight fixed? Like I'm seeing a lot of people are trying to say that was a weird knockdown. His striking was a little suspect. I'm seeing a lot of it was potentially fixed, which reminds me of that Chael Sonnen fight, which for whatever reason, I think the Chuck Liddell fight they were saying was fixed also. Like I guess Tito doesn't compete in real fights.
we I don't buy into all the fixing stuff. I think you I think everyone would be able to sniff it out if it was actually fixed like that. I don't think Tito Ortiz is that great an actor, if we're being honest here. And you're saying the striking is suspect. It is suspect. It's always been suspect. We've been watching this guy for 20 years. We know his striking is suspect. So this is not surprising at all. He can't wrestle now. His main weapon is taken away. All you have is your hands, Tito. Like boxing was never your sport. You should not have tried that. But look, if he got his money and that's what he was after, fine, whatever. I don't know what he was after. It probably was just money. Like, I've still got my athleticism. I've still got my name. I can make some money off of these people. Is Triller going to pay them? Who knows? That's the only thing you hope.
I mean, the thing is, I will say, like, the way he fell was kind of odd. It was like a slow motion sack of potatoes falling, but like that man ate a clean shot. Like, you know what I mean? There's no, you didn't get jabbed and fell down. Like that was clean. And I saw some people on Twitter were like, tell us you haven't watched Tito Ortiz fight before, without actually saying it. And it was like, oh, it's striking. It's like everybody's like, yeah, he can't strike. That's not what he's known for.
Yeah, I think every time we have these, especially these cards that bring out the people who aren't very interested in combat sports generally, like the freak show events, right? Every time we have them, people are coming out saying, "Oh, this is fixed." They don't watch combat sports. You and I watch combat sports. A lot of people who watch combat sports seen enough. We understand. Okay, this is something that can kind of happen. It's just the way it is. There's a billion ways people can fall when they're losing consciousness or have been separated from consciousness, right?
I mean, there's no glorious way of falling, really. Like you eat a clean one, you're not just gonna, do some sort of elegant fall onto the canvas and then, let me gather myself. Like you're gonna fall embarrassingly. I mean, sometimes your knees are gonna buckle, you're gonna look weird. I mean, there's no elegant way of making that happen.
Yeah, ask Mirko Krokop about the best way to fall down, right?
Oh man. Could that have been more surprising? Like that seems like if MMA was a fake sport, like that seems like a very WWE thing to happen. Like, to get your own weapon used on you like that while your leg twists, like that, something about it feels fake.
I get what you're saying there in that sense, but because it's like, oh my, the perfect irony of it, right?
Like,
but also at the same time, there is absolutely no way that the UFC said, man, we should really have Krokop lose here because we love Gabriel Gonzaga.
Exactly.
We want to push Gabriel Gonzaga now. No bookers in the back were pushing Gabe Gonzaga to go for the title. Not a chance.
The funny thing about him is like, I mean, he was a fun fighter. He hit hard, had a good ground game, but Gabriel Gonzaga always looked like somebody's dad, was out there competing. And something about it just felt like it was like, it felt like you were watching somebody's father came out there with a super hairy chest and all that stuff. But he had some fun fights. I mean, I remember the Derek Lewis fight was one of those showcases where it was like they were continuing to build that name for him. So he's been in some moments, but man, definitely not one of those fighters that you want to start to push.
His whole career was like, I was actually looking at Gabe Gonzaga recently, just looking at his his tapology and his record and that kind of thing recently, and really his whole career is Mirko Krokop and the fact that he got the title shot off of that. Everything else was because of that. He hasn't really done much else otherwise. Like he had a solid career. He won some fights, he lost some fights. He was enjoyable to watch. It was heavyweight. He's like heavyweight MMA. So, sometimes you get some good stuff and sometimes you get heavyweight MMA.
But I feel like that's the case for a lot of guys too, where they have the one signature win and they sort of, I don't know how to explain, like their whole career is that signature win. Like, oh, he's here because he beat that person. And I don't want to say this is his situation, but I feel like Darren Till is sort of in a similar spot where he beat Cowboy Cerrone. Everybody decided he was going to be a star. And since then, things have been a little up and down. I think he went, 2-4. I saw some people try to say he was 0-6 or something crazy. Like it seems like he's in a bit of that similar situation a little bit, especially after that Derek Brunson fight.
Darren Till's an interesting one. I kind of I like that comparison there because and not so much because of Cowboy, but when he got the win, contested as it was very closely contested between him and Wonderboy. When he beat Stephen Thompson, that was the one that I think gave him, obviously he knocked out Cowboy and I don't know how many people really watched that one. That was, I want to say that was on like Fight Pass or something like that.
It was in one of those weird countries where you're like, oh, I guess they had a card over there, like Poland or something weird like that.
I think it might have been Asia or something. I'm misremembering too. But anyway, yeah, you're right. I want to say it was a Fight Pass card. How many people are watching that? How many people are actually getting that off of that? I think it was more after he beat, like I said, Wonder Boy. That was what pushed him into that title picture where they said, okay, now they can rush him there because he's English and they like to have English contenders. They like to have the guys that can, bring people in over there and get that kind of the money and the interest and the buy rates in Europe. For him though, I think you're right. Like this is someone who really, he made his name off of, we could say those two wins, right? But the real one, Wonder Boy, is the one that was like the real feather in the cap. I think he has looked like he belongs, I think, in most fights since then. But he just isn't quite good enough to get over those humps. Like you could say maybe he deserved the win over Robert Whittaker, which, I mean, if that's the case, Robert Whittaker is the next challenger for the title, former champion. That's a really good win, but he didn't quite get it. And then he loses all these other fights. If you lose this many fights, it's kind of on you. I think we're really seeing what he is. He's just a guy who's very good, but not quite good enough to get over the hump.
Yeah, I remember before the Tyron Woodley fight, like the English media, they were trying to sell us Darren Till. They were like, this is the next champion. He's a GOAT. Watch what he's going to do to Woodley. And it's like, I get it. That's like your countryman. That's like I didn't think it was fair because, I felt like, we're supposed to remain out of it, right? We're supposed to be unbiased, supposed to tell you, here's what's happening. And it's none of our opinion, but whatever. They were hyping him up, making him seem exciting. And then Woodley, I think if I'm not mistaken, that might have been his last MMA win, but he just styled on him. I just remember watching it and you're thinking like, oh yeah, that's why Woodley's champion. And that's where Woodley entered didn't last long, but for a little bit, everyone's like, is he the next welterweight GOAT? Is he going to surpass GSP? And now obviously it seems a little silly looking back, but that was an interesting case of shutting down that hype.
Yeah, you're right. I want to say that was his last MMA. It's really the last time he looked literally any good in combat sports, right? It's been years. That fight was, I want to say, like September 2018 or something. Maybe it was 2019 or something. But ever since then, he lost all 5 rounds to Carl Usman. He lost all 5 rounds to Gilbert Burns, right? And he lost 4 rounds before he got finished against Colby Covington. He lost to Jake Paul in a boxing match that somehow we were all sitting there thinking like, oh man, he's got the power, he could win. Yes. And granted, he actually, if you look at that boxing match, and I didn't watch a ton of it, but I saw at least some of the clips of it, he definitely had Jake Paul hurt at that one point in the fight. But he didn't win the fight. Like nobody's sitting there. And again, I didn't watch it myself, but I'm going to trust the masses here who watch combat sports saying he didn't win this fight. I trust them on that. It is a shame for Tyron because I think he still does have a very excellent body of work. And I think over time, hopefully people will remember that more than they'll remember the end, because how many guys are we going to remember Evander Holyfield for last night? Are we going to remember him for what he did in the 80s and 90s? I hope it's for that.
Well, I think for Holyfield, a lot of people are just going to remember that he got his ear bitten off. I think that
some people,
for them, that's going to be his legacy. When in reality, it's like, well, it's a fun one, but look past it. But to get back to Tyron Woodley, like the weird thing about him is some fighters like a Chuck Liddell, for example, it's obvious that he's done because, we're seeing him eat shots. He goes down right away, loses 3-4 in a row. But with Woodley, you almost feel like if you could sit down and talk to him, which is how it feels in combat sports, you just want to shake him, like throw some volume, put some pressure on guys. Like you still have a great chin. Like that one is such an odd one because you feel like it's mental watching him out there and not, throwing volume. Even the Jake Paul fight, I didn't watch the whole thing, saw some clips, same situation as you, but there were some things where you were like, man, if you could have just followed up with a couple, I'm sure you could have done something against a guy who's not a real boxer.
I think Tyron Woodley is someone who, when we've seen volume from him in MMA, it's because he already had somebody hurt.
Yeah.
It's not, he's never been one to rush you or anything like that. But if he has you, he will swarm. He's done that. He did that against Wonder Boy. That's the kind of thing that I think we see from Woodley. He's always been very patient, but now, because I don't know what happened. I mean, who knows what happened along the way? I don't know if it was he just wasn't right in the Usman fight and it hasn't corrected itself ever since then. But yeah, he does seem even more tentative, knowing his back is against the wall in some of these situations. And I mean, shoot, he doesn't have to worry about getting taken down anymore once you get to boxing. Like, just walk forward. I say that as someone who's never trained boxing.
Exactly.
And I will understand that it is not as simple as just telling someone to walk forward. But Tyron Woodley, I mean, come on. You in what was it, third round when he hurt him? Was it the third round?
So
I'm trying to remember.
I couldn't even tell
I
you.
want to say it was the third round. It was an 8-round fight. You had 5 rounds. At least okay, I can hurt this guy. I mean, I don't know at what point it comes over from just being, you have this mental block to that's not the type of fighter he is. He's just never, ever going to be that. I don't know.
I remember when he went to fight Robbie Lawler, like Robbie was on the streak of every fight is fight of the decade, fight of the year, because he was coming off Condit and McDonald, all these guys. So people were like,
fights.
Woodley Lawler, it's going to be another brawl. And then some people were like, well, I mean, Robbie, yes, but that's not how Tyron fights. And then I remember the fight happens, and a lot of people are expecting a brawl. There was very little action. Woodley saw an opening, threw a couple punches. It was completely over, and it was just like, oh, okay, Woodley's a different beast. But it's funny to me how many people expected Woodley to go out there and just abandon everything, just throw crazily. Like that was never going to be his game plan going into any fight, but especially not that fight.
No, absolutely not. And at least they even had some familiarity too. So he already had the idea of how he can approach Robbie Lawler. There didn't need to be quite as much, feeling out and figuring out, well, how does this guy kind of operate? You don't have that. So even still, this is just someone who knew that, okay, I'm going to wait for my opportunities against Robbie because he's going to give them to me. Robbie is going to give the opportunities. Not everybody is,
Speaking of Robbie Lawler, he comes back. I want to say, is it this month? Is it this month we're getting?
It is this month. I hope it's him and Nick Diaz, the pay-per-view this month. I want to say it's on September 25th. Yeah.
I'm excited for that one. I don't know if that's just the combat sports fan in me. It's like, oh my God, it's Nick Diaz, and I'm going to watch and be sad like everybody else. But I'm excited. I'll be at Buffalo Wild Wings, Marty, trying to figure out where I'm going to stick the poster so we can see Nick Diaz. Like, I'm pretty excited for this one, and I hope it's not the kind of fight that breaks your heart where you're like, oh yeah, both these guys are old.
It certainly could be. I don't want to rule that out, but I will say I think that there are enough people in the UFC right now for like sort of an old man's division in welterweight. Yes. It's these two, Carlos Condit, Matt Brown,
and Cowboy. You throw Cowboy in there.
Cowboy, sure. I mean, if Cowboy really ought to be fighting anymore, I don't know. But these are the guys that I think you can at least put them into like this little division. Just let them fight each other. You don't need to have to feed them to the prospects. I think you could still, if I'm the UFC, I look at this, I can still make some money off of these guys' name value. Why don't we let them fight each other a little bit? And then if you want to spend them on a prospect to give them a name, do that then. Like the winner of Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler, depending on, especially if Nick wants to play ball. I'm sure Nick has his own ideas, and he's been him and Nate have been very protective of the way they've run their careers, and I think smartly so.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're going to do from this, but if he wins this, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with Nick Diaz. I am worried about Nick just in the sense that, yeah, we haven't seen him fight in almost 7 years. Almost 7 years.
That's crazy.
It's wild since the Silva fight. That was January 2015. A lot of people's lives have changed. I wasn't a father then. I have 2 kids and they're both in school. Things have changed in the world and in my life in particular. And I don't know what he's going to be now. But if you're going to bring him back, I think Robbie Lawler is probably the best opponent for everything. Like from a promotional standpoint, it gives people what we wanted. We've wanted Robbie Lawler and Nick Diaz too forever. It's probably later than it ought to have been, but it's here and I'm okay with it. And it's not against someone who's, going to descramble their brains one or the other. I like this one. I'm actually interested in it too.
Just to make everybody feel old, like if we're playing where was I, January 2015, I was a junior in high school, just to put it in perspective. I was a junior in high school. Now I'm I'm going to be 24 next week, and I have a bachelor's degree. Like, I'm a grown man now. Like, that's crazy to think. Like, that's how long ago he fought. Now, I still remember when he got suspended, and there's no way he's going to sit out 5 years. Correct. Correct. He's not going to sit out 5 years. It's going to be six or
Six
seven.
and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, because he was the
Yeah.
fight the power with Nick Diaz. You're like, yeah, there's no way. No, okay, he did it without meaning to, but sure enough, he waited almost more than 5 years.
It was the principle of the thing. He just
Yeah,
had to
exactly.
fight the punishment. He didn't like it, and granted, it was a stupid punishment. 5 years for that particular offense. Like I don't partake, but I look at it and I say, come on, for what we're suspending other people for, and you're suspending this, get out of here. That was horrible, and it's good that they didn't leave it at that. But it is still just so funny that he's like, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to sit out.
That's a very Nick Diaz thing to do. It's like, I'm not going to do it because you're telling me to do it. I'm going to do it because that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And you're like, come on, man. But at least he made a return. I feel like if he'd retired off the Anderson Silva, I feel like we're kind of unfulfilled a little bit. Like, even if he comes back for just one, I don't know. I feel like depending on how it goes, could be the ending we're looking for.
I actually didn't hate him going out that way, because it was such a weird fight, right? The Anderson Silva fight was just so bizarre. He lies down in the middle of the cage. Like, you almost want that to be like the final image of Nick Diaz competing, just because it just shows very much who he is. Like, he doesn't care. He'll do it. He'll style in the cage in the weirdest ways. And he was against someone who loved to style in the cage too, in Anderson, and he showed him up in that respect. We remember what he did more than we remember what Anderson did in that fight.
Well, what I like about this match with Robbie is that, no one's shooting for a double. No one's trying to level change. No one's going to show off their jiu-jitsu. Like, this should be, as long as nothing's weird, but it is Nick Diaz, it is MMA, but should be a good kickboxing or boxing match even. And, we're going to see if Nick Diaz looks good or not. He certainly looks in shape, right? I feel like every year we get a picture of him shirtless, holding up a fist and mean mugging the camera. It's like, oh, look what insane shape he's in. He rides bikes. But, I feel like matchmaking wise, I do really like this fight. And that was kind of my argument for Anderson Silva is, old people against old people. Like, I feel like there's still something to be made there.
I don't know if this is necessarily just going to be a striking affair. It probably will be, but Nick certainly has amazing jiu-jitsu. He's got a Gogo Plata win, which I'm a huge fan of Gogo Platas, first of all. I have to say that. And I think Robbie isn't necessarily totally averse to the idea of taking it. I don't think he wants to go down to Nick Diaz's world here. I think he'd prefer to strike it, of course, but I wouldn't be surprised if Nick finds an opportunity to grapple, that he takes it, because that is a weakness of Robbie's. We've seen him submitted before. It's funny. People have, like, I think they've completely forgotten about what Robbie Lawler was like in Strikeforce, which is when he was up at middleweight. He was up as high as 195 when he fought against Babalu Sabral, and he lost that fight. He really wasn't the same fighter until he got back down to fighting guys his own weight. So when he was up at 185, he's losing by submission. I lost to Jake Jake Shields, different Jakes. He lost to, I believe he lost to Jacare too by submission as well.
That was guillotine or something like that. Yeah,
probably something like that. I can't remember, but yeah, I mean, that's a weakness. If Nick wants to win, and you can win spectacularly by submission. He's certainly capable of that. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I think we're going to have a fun fight no matter. I just couldn't see this one being a disappointing fight. I actually can't see that.
Those are very dangerous words in MMA, and you should know better than to say that, because we're gonna get jabs into nothing from across the fence, kicks being thrown towards nothing happening. 29-28, nobody knows who won because nobody did anything. Like, you just did something very dangerous.
Is this a 5-round fight though? I thought this was a 5-round non-title fight. Yeah,
you're right. So
it's not even going to be 28-27. It could be 48-47. I just don't see it. I imagine we're going to get the same Nick Diaz that we've always had. I don't think Nick can stray from who he is. Tyron Woodley can't avoid who he is, which is, kind of a non-volume, passive, come at me striker. And Nick Diaz can't avoid being, I'm in your face and I'm going to flip you the bird as often as I can and try to get you to punch me so that I can punch you a lot too. I think it's going to be fun. I know I'm jinxing it. I'm going to try it anyway. I really do think this one can't disappoint.
Well, what I love about, like, Nick Diaz's return is some guys, they come back and you feel like they've been so far removed, but Nick, like, this guy has kept in shape the whole time, right? So everybody's talking about he's a triathlon athlete or whatever it is specifically. I'm not an expert on that, but like he's been training. We've seen him with guys like Tyson Fury working on his boxing and stuff. So you feel like he still took it seriously. He's not one of those guys getting up off the couch and let's see if I've got something left in the tank. Like you feel like this is a real return, like somebody that I don't know. I feel like he actually wants to do it.
I don't think he'd come back if he didn't want to. You don't
Yeah,
sit out for
yeah,
6 years if you don't want to, unless you never know if money's a concern. I have no idea, and I hope he's not in that situation. I definitely don't wish that on any fighter, but yeah, I think he's back because he actually wants to do it. I really do. I didn't think he wanted to do it. I was actually very, very skeptical. Even, a few months back, I think there was like saying, oh, I think I want to go back. Or it was, I forget if Dana was saying it. Someone was saying that Nick wanted to come back. And I'm like, yeah, I'll believe when I see it. And I'm still, part of me is still kind of like, well, we'll see if he should, not that he wouldn't show up, but we'll see if this fight actually happens. But if it does, and I hope it does, I do think it is because the passion is there. He is interested in actually getting in a cage and fighting as opposed to just, starting shit.
I think how crazy it is that, he comes back and he's still kind of a star. Like people are talking about him when there's a whole new generation of fans that showed up since he fought. And I'm sure people have gone in and out of the sport since then, but Nate did such a great job of keeping the Diaz name out there. And it feels like Nick was kept like in a cage or something, right? And they're like, and we're going to unleash the older Diaz brother. Like he gets bigger. And then, you do feel like there's excitement for him, even though I'm sure there's so many people that have never watched him fight live before.
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of people who've never actually experienced Nick Diaz. I think they know Nate, they've seen Nate here and there, but I think there's going to be a lot of people who came in on the Conor wave, right? On the Conor McGregor wave. And they're just, they don't know what he's like. They just think he's, for all I know, you might be bait and switching him. Like it's, you might just convince them it is actually Nate Diaz, and that's the guy they know. Almost like the Pauls. Like sometimes I mix up the Pauls in my head. I know who they are, but like at the beginning, I'm like Logan and Jay. They're two different people. I was getting all mixed up. So I imagine someone who's a little more casual, or maybe just came in on that wave, and they know Nate from Conor. They'll probably be like, wait, is it Nate or Dick? I'm confused, especially because they have the ends, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nate and Nick. It's a similar name.
Yeah. Exactly, but I'm excited for it. But ever since it got announced, I'm sort of in the it's not happening until I see them like get into the cage. Like I'm trying to pretend, but now we're like 2 weeks away, and it's getting to that point where it's like I shouldn't, but I'm kind of getting excited about it. Like it's such a fun addition to a pay-per-view card and 5 rounds. Like now it's main events, title, Diaz. Like I just love that they managed to create their own rules just because they feel like it too.
I like the 5-round non-title fights. And not every fight has to be that way, but I really do think if you're going to do it, you're going to do it with guys like Diaz brothers. Trying to think of guys. I would have said Frankie Edgar, but now I'm, after the knockout at the beginning of the year from Corey Sandhagen, I'm less interested in watching him fight over 5 rounds than I used to be. But yeah, there are certain guys that I think, and certain fights with certain levels of import, that if you want to put it on the pay-per-view, it really ought to have 5 rounds. And I'm glad to see it. I've been kind of hoping for this for a little while. So it's nice to see. I'm just curious if they're going to actually expand outside of the Diaz brothers, because so far it's just a Diaz thing. The 5-round non-title fight is just a Diaz thing.
Well, that's the interesting thing is I wrote an article about it because, you had write-up news, but it was like Gaethje was like, if you're not going to be paying me or putting a title or something, he's like, I'm not doing 5 rounds. Like, that's where I get hurt. And to be fair, Gaethje fighting for 1 minute, somebody's going to get hurt. That's just his tornado full of fist fight style. But it is interesting to see, like, Diaz, they'll win a fight with unlimited rounds, but other guys are like, nah, that's how you take too much damage.
I mean, it's funny to hear Gaethje say that because he doesn't really get past round 3 very often. It's just not a thing that's going to happen too much just because of the way he fights. Yeah, he beat Tony Ferguson that way. He beat him in round 5. He was winning that fight. It was competitive for a little while, and then it really wasn't. But I think that there are guys like Justin. Maybe if you can't get him to do it for a title, fine. But I think there's some fights. Hopefully, no heavyweight fights. I hope there's never a heavyweight non-title 5-round fight. I would pray for that. But again, we can find fights that are interesting. I'm trying to think like over the years what there would be. And I'm struggling with it, but I know that we've had fights over the last few years, especially on pay-per-view, that it's like, man, if they just had 5 rounds to figure that out, I think we would have had fire. We would have figured out a little bit more clearly who won the fight. And these are, pivotal fights that sometimes decide who gets the title shot and that kind of thing.
So before we end things, I want to talk a little bit about your time covering MMA. I know you've crossed paths with some famous guys in the industry like Mark Raimondi and stuff like that. Tell us a little bit about how you sort of got started into covering MMA and all that good stuff.
I kind of force of willed it at every stop I've been at. When my first full-time job was at a newspaper up in kind of in the boonies in New Jersey, up north. It's a little more farm country up there, and that's where the Miller brothers lived, Jim and Dan Miller. So when I was getting into the sport, I was very into the sport at this point. It was about 2010 or so, and this was when Dan was at this point he was fighting Bisping in the co-main event of the Rashad Evans Rampage Jackson fight. So I pitched to the editor. I said, hey, we should cover this. He's a local guy. So I said, okay, they said, okay, we'll do that. I went there, I took some photos, I wrote a story, and it was in the paper and everything. And Jim was having his rise up the rankings too, because some people maybe don't remember that. They only remember Jim as the guy who's always fighting. He'll fight anybody. But there was a time where he was very, very close to a title shot, and I was covering him around that time as well. So I had a lot of fun kind of forcing myself into that. I talked to Frankie Edgar at the time. I talked to some other, mostly New Jersey based guys. We were very focused on that, but I did get to cover, John Jones when he won the title the first time over Shogun. I got to cover any events that were in New Jersey, that kind of thing. I eventually moved on to AM New York, which is a commuter newspaper in the city in Manhattan. So when I was there, I had a lot of control over content and that kind of coverage directions, that kind of thing. And I was into UFC. So anytime there was a reason to cover the UFC, I made sure to do it. And then again, like I said, when I got to the Post, there was a hole there, and I said, hey, can I do it? So more or less, I've been hired everywhere I have been for other reasons. And I said, well, we ought to be covering the sport. And they said, okay. So I just made this beat happen for myself. It kind of through force of will, I guess. Right.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like today the way people do it is you join a website no one's ever heard of. You write articles until, you start getting opportunities. But for you, it was like you're already at like a big place. Like if they cover MMA, people are like, that's legit. You know what I mean? It's not just some fan that likes to write some words about it. Like for you, when you're doing it, like people are paying attention. Like it's a big deal.
I think the UFC does crave mainstream media coverage. I think they have for a very long time. And I think that was what made it a lot easier for me to get my foot in the door doing whatever it is I wanted for it. Hats off to anybody who's at kind of the smaller sites you're talking about. That's a tough journey. My understanding is that the money is not super great early on, especially. So you're kind of just doing it because you like it. Right. And I had a salary that was completely separate of that. So anything that I was able to do in the sport was sometimes it was on my own time. Like some of what I do for the New York Post even is just kind of outside of my normal shift hours, and I make time for it. So in that sense, I'm technically doing it for no pay, but it's really not, because this is my job. I'm taking it on for the outlet that I already work for. It's a tough road to go the other way though, because not everybody can kind of take the James Lynch route or even Ariel Helwani, essentially kind of with the rise of the sport kind of came up that way too. Not everybody can do that. And it's a tough journey. It's not for the faint of heart from my understanding. So I wish anybody out there luck who's doing it, and, just make sure as you're doing it, you always look out for your own health and interest in the sport. It can wane, even me, I've had my bouts here and there of like, man, sometimes I really just don't want to cover this UFC event, right? Sometimes they're just not that attractive and they feel like kind of lower caliber other than maybe a headliner or that kind of thing. You have to keep the love of the sport going. Otherwise it's going to be a problem for you.
I feel like that's the thing too. A lot of people, they get mad at media and stuff like that, and they feel like a lot of the media, they cover it because they have to and stuff like that. But the people that cover the sport, like, yeah, at least from the people I've talked to, it's like, if you don't love it, then you're not doing it. Like, this sport is not that big that you can just do it just because somebody has to do it. Like, so many people have a passion or have a story of getting into it as a fan and then turning themselves into a media member. Like, it really feels like this is one of those sports where the people that cover it really do have a love for the sport.
Yeah, I think anybody who's involved in the sport is very passionate about it. Maybe there was a time, or maybe there was a person here or there that said, I'm just doing this because they told me to do it. Yeah. That kind of thing. And I remember a long time ago, and I don't remember who the take came from, but somebody was saying, you're you're just covering UFC right now because you want something else, or you were a failed person at like
Oh
this
yeah.
other sports and stuff like that. It's like, who who is that? Who is that actually speaking to? I don't think there's anybody that represents that. The people who I have ever seen do anything in this sport, even if they moved on from it, they didn't move on because they were like, yeah, finally now I get the NFL beat. That's not
Yeah.
really how it works. If you're a stick and ball reporter, you probably were a stick and ball reporter for a lower level thing, like you covered minor league baseball somewhere, or you had an internship somewhere, and then you that kind of thing. That's not really a natural progression that people go through, in my experience.
We speaking of the MMA media, we saw recently there was this, I guess, this beef that started between Ariel and Brendan Schaub, which is weird because you feel like there aren't that many storylines in the MMA media, just guys joining new websites and stuff. And now we have sort of this weird thing going on. What did you think the first time you kind of heard about that? Because it is a very strange situation, but people seem to be enjoying it.
Ariel is doing a lot with his brand right now, and I commend him for it, because now he is able to monetize himself in a way that I think a lot of media members ought to aspire to in that sense, because he can live a very comfortable lifestyle doing that. And now he doesn't have to worry about, obviously, the UFC being over his shoulder. Say what you want about the journey that got him here. I'm not here to cast stones or anything like that. I work with Ariel in the MMA JA too. We're on a committee together, so I have nothing against Ariel. But yeah, I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, Ariel, I think, has crossed over into this media personality thing where he still does journalism, especially now that he's away from ESPN. But he very much is a personality, almost in the same level as like a Skip Bayless. And I don't want to compare him to Skip Bayless, because Skip, it just drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
And I hope Ariel never goes there. But I and just saying hot takes to hot takes, but him and Schaub, Brendan Schaub obviously is he made himself into a personality too, after he left fighting. This is what he is. So if the two of them want to have that kind of thing, and it kind of probably raises both their profiles, more power to them.
How important do you think that is to cross over into that like personality? Like you're still doing the same thing, but it's like now people follow you because they're a fan of you personally. Like that seems a little bit odd, but how important do you think that is, especially in this industry where it seems like people like fighters with personality? They like, that personality on top of what you already do.
Depends what you're looking to do. Not everybody wants to be that. I don't know that that's necessarily what I want for myself. I like writing. I wish I could go back 25 years and just be a writer who covers like a sport, and I don't have to worry about social media, and I don't have to worry about, going, not necessarily going on podcasts. I do enjoy doing stuff like this. Radio appearances would have been kind of that thing 25 years ago. Right. But hot take culture, I'm not a huge fan of. I have my takes. I don't know if they're hot or cold, but I have my takes. I try not to just make something up to say it. If people like that kind of thing and you want to aspire to that, there's a lot more money in it doing that than probably what I would most definitely want for myself, is like peak kind of thing. But I got a family to feed, so I don't rule out anything. But I just, whatever I do, whatever my journey takes me, I just want to stay true to myself. That's important to me.
This week I got my first like hateful message from someone that read something I wrote and wasn't happy about it, and it feels like a big thing because you're like, they looked me up, they found my Twitter to message me, but I knew the thing was a little bit baity because at Clutch Points we can like every thumbnail is custom, so you can ask for kind of what you want. And so for this article I was like, can I get a picture of Joe Rogan, and behind him can I get a horse? And then basically the article was like, and it was a little bit of bait, but it was like, he explains why he's using a horse dewormer. And this guy messages me. He's like, you're spreading false information. It's not a horse dewormer. He is a human. And I was like, man, just read the article, man. Like, and then I doubted myself. I was like, is it not a horse dewormer? Did I not? Like, the article had no opinions. It was just, here are your quotes. Here's, the backstory you need. But it made me feel good that someone, knows who I am now based
Little
on a thumbnail.
validation.
Yeah, there you go. It's like, I am legit. I matter.
Well, I would say there's always going to be someone out there who's crazy enough to say something or chase you down or anything like that. I don't know if you've ever watched and seen during the broadcast of UFCs where once in a while, obviously they put up reporter tweets and a lot of things like that. Sometimes mine get up there with like my round score or something like that. And if it's something that somebody disagrees with,
Oh
there's
yeah.
enough people who are going to come find me and tell me that I'm on crack, that, I shouldn't be covering the sport. Good thing you're not a judge. Yeah, good thing I'm not a judge. It's not what I do. I'm not trained to be a judge. But you know what? You probably are saying that as someone who actually doesn't think the judges know how to be judges either. And realistically speaking, a lot of people just don't know how to judge a fight.
Exactly. One of my favorite things about those tweets on the broadcast is I want to say his name's Ryan Frederick, where he's one of those
Yes.
guys like not well, I mean, I can only speak for, myself but I've sort of seen tweets about it where people kind of don't really know who he is. And every time they'll post his tweet, like there'll be tons of who is Ryan how does he keep getting you just see the frustration from people. And I just love that he rides with it. Like he seems to enjoy it's like, yeah, I'm gonna keep getting on these things while you guys beg to get on the TV.
More power to Ryan. He's part of, I guess, our little crew that, not that we have any sort of organized crew, but the people who like to put the round scores up there and that kind of thing. Ryan gets a lot of hate too. I think probably even more so than me. I think because he does it all the time. I'm lately, especially, I've had less time that I'm able to sit down and put up my scores for the fights. So, no one's saying to the UFC, like Ryan and I don't go to the UFC's production team. We don't go to them and be like, hey, you should use our tweets. We really want some publicity.
Yeah.
One day I got followed by someone from the UFC production team. And then later that day, my tweets started showing up on the broadcast. That was how it happened. That's exactly how it happened. I have no control over it. I was doing it before. I do it after. If they stop using my tweets, I don't care. It's certainly given me just a little bit of extra exposure. And sometimes I'll talk to like friends. They'll be like, I saw your tweet. And I'm like, yeah, it's on there. That's cool. But I don't know. If you're sitting there waiting, especially if you're like not in media and you're not if you're not a fighter or anybody who, people would pay attention to for literally any reason, if you're just kind of Joe Schmo, you can't sit there and get mad that your tweet's not come up. It's never going to come up. They will never use your tweet. It's never going to happen.
It's crazy that people would think that the UFC, who famously does not like the media, would have people, hey man, this next tweet's gonna be fire. So if we could see that on the TV, that'd be like, you really think the UFC would be like, oh, gotcha, man. We know we love our media. Like, there's no way that would ever happen.
No, that's not why they do it. I don't know. I forget exactly when they started doing the media tweets as opposed to just like fighter tweets or like, celebrity. Oh, I can't wait to watch this fight. Gonna be fire. Yeah. The things that their publicists, I assume, tell them to put up there or something. Yeah, I don't know when that happened. And if it goes away, honestly, I find them a little distracting sometimes. So if it went away, I'd actually be happier.
Exactly. This seems like a good stopping point because we have done an hour here. But normally when we end these things, I always like to give the guest a chance to, if you've got social media, you got things you want to plug, stuff coming up for the New York Post that you want to share, anything like that, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I have an interview that I did with Sarah Alpar, who's fighting this weekend on the card, and obviously she drew a lot of eyeballs over the summer with the GoFundMe that she put up there to help kind of fund her camp and everything like that. I spoke to her about kind of the reasons behind that and that kind of thing. That's coming to the New York Post in the coming days. Follow me on Twitter at Scott_Fontana. I have a podcast that I do with my guy Dan Urban called the Couchside Judges MMA Podcast, or on Spotify, Apple, all the places you can find us. We talk about the judging from all the events, a couple days, a day or two after each event. We always break it down to kind of help people understand why a fight was scored the way it was. So if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, I hope you check us out.
Well, there we go. And for all the people listening, like I always say, holy shit, you made it to the end. You know what I mean? It seems like nothing, but it is a big deal when people make it to the end. So, Scott, thank you so much for doing this, man. This was a lot of fun. We got to a few controversial topics, but it was a lot of fun. For the people watching, like, make sure you like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We're on all the podcast platforms, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you.